Chapter 28. There was a low murmur of interest from the assembled crowd as the five companions followed Hodak into the main hall. At the head of the room, Ragnar sat on his massive carved chair. Beside and slightly behind him, Will recognized a slightly stooped form of Slager, as the treacherous Jarl leant down to whisper something to Ragnar. The Overjar angrily waved him away, then gestured towards Evelyn, who was trying to make herself as inconspicuous as possible behind Eric. "Bring her forward," Ragnar's massive voice used to dominating the howling gales of the storm white, boomed painfully in the low-ceiling hall. Evelyn shrank back instinctively, then recovered as Holt touched her arm and met her eyes with a reassuring smile. She straightened her shoulders and drew herself up to her full height. Will watched in admiration as she walked down the cleared space in the center of the hall. Holt, Eric, and the two apprentices followed close behind her. Horace, Will noticed, was continually easing his sword in its scabbard, lifting it to free the blade, then allowing it to drop back again. As he noticed, Will's own hand stayed to the hilt of his throwing knife. If things were as badly as they'd all feared, he decided that knife was for Slager. Once before, on Scourgill, Will had demonstrated his skills with the knife to Eric's and Slager's crew, throwing across the room and skewering a small wooden keg next to Slager's hand. This time there would be no keg. The room rocked in utter silence as Evelyn stopped before Ragnar's raised dais. She met the Overjar's glower with a calm, composed expression on her face. Again, Will found himself almost overwhelmed by her courage and her composure. Slager signed to a pair of attendants by a side door. "Bring in the slave," he called. His voice was soft and silky, totally unlike Ragnar's forceful bellow. He sounded very pleased with the current turn of events, Will thought. The two men rose from Slager's crew, opened the door, and dragged in a protesting, weeping figure. She was a middle-aged woman, her hair graying and her face lined before its time with the strain of unending labor, poor food, and the threat of constant punishment that was the lot of a slave in Helsham. The sailor dragged her forward and cast her down on the floor in front of Evelyn. She crouched there miserably, her eyes down. "Look up, slave," Slager told her in that same voice. Her sobbing continued, and she shook her head, her eyes still cast down at the floor. Slager moved quickly, stepping down from the platform and drawing his axe knife in one smooth movement. He held the razor-sharp blade below the woman's chin, pressing into the flesh of her neck with not quite sufficient force to break the skin. "I said, look up," he repeated, and applied pressure to the knife to raise her eyes until she was gazing at Evelyn. As she saw the woman began sobbing even louder. "Shut up," Slager told her. "Shut up. Shut up that noise and tell the Overjar what you had told me." There were angry wheels across the woman's face. Obviously, she had been beaten recently. Her ragged shirt was torn in several spots as well, and more red marks were visible on her body through the gaps. In some places, blood had soaked through the thin material. Her fear-filled eyes pleaded with Evelyn. "I'm sorry, my lady," she said, her voice breaking. "They beat me until I told." Evelyn took an involuntary step towards her, but Slager's knife swung up and around to confront her and stop her coming closer. Beside him, Will heard Horace's quick intake of breath and saw his hand fall to the sword hilt once more. He placed his own hand over Horace's, stopping him from drawing the sword. The heavily built apprentice looked around at him, surprised. Will shook his head slightly. He realized that Horace's movement had been a reflex reaction, and he knew that in this tinderbox atmosphere, if his friend ever drew the sword, it could mean the end of all of them. Not yet, he mouthed the words. If the time came, he was willing to join Horace in an attack on Slager and Ragnar, but first, he thought, they should see if Holt couldn't talk their way out of the situation. "Leave the talking to me," the ranger had told them before they left his left his apartment, and don't you do anything until I tell you. Clear? The two boys had nodded. Then Holt had added, "This puts an altogether different slant on our accusing Slager, of course." "But surely you're still going to tell Ragnar," Will had bursted out. Holt shook his head doubtfully. "The problem is, he's got us in first. If we make a counter-accusation now, it'll look like as if we're simply doing it to save Evelyn. Chances are Ragnar will ignore it altogether." "But you can't let him get away with," Will began, but Holt held up a hand to silence him. "I'm not letting him get away with anything," he reassured them. "We'll just have to pick the right time to bring the matter up. That's all." Now Slager turned back to the woman on the floor. "Tell the Obergel," he repeated. The woman said nothing, and Slager turned to Ragnar in exasperation. "My head slave overheard her talking to some of the others," he explained. "She's Ireland originally, and she said that she recognized the girl here." He jerked a thumb in Evelyn's direction. "As the Princess Cassandra, Duncan's daughter." Ragnar's eyes narrowed, and he turned slightly to inspect Evelyn. Her chin went up, and she stood a little taller under his gaze. "She does have something of the look of Duncan about her," he said suspiciously. No, I was mistaken," the slave burst out suddenly on her knees. She stretched her hands out to Slager in supplication. "Now I see her close too. I realize I was wrong, Lord Slager. I was mistaken." "You called her my lady," Slager reminded her. "It was a mistake. That was all, a mistake. Now I see her properly. I can tell it's not her," the woman insisted. Slager regarded her with a pained expression on his face. He turned to Ragnar again. "She's lying, Oberjar," he said. "I'll have my men beat the truth out of her." He made a signal to the two men again, and one of them came forward, uncoiling a short, thick whip as he came. The woman cringed away from him. "No, please, my lord, please." Her voice was shrill with fear as she tried to crawl away. Slager's man grabbed a handful of her hair to stop her, and she cried out again, in pain as well as fear. He raised a vicious-looking whip over his head, ready to bring it down. "Leave her alone," Evelyn cried, and her voice froze the sailor where he stood. He looked uncertainly to Slager for direction, but the warship captain was watching Evelyn, waiting for her to say more. "All right," she said quietly. "I'm Cassandra. There's no need to torture her further." The silence in the room was almost a physical force. Then an excited buzz broke in and out among the assembled crowd. Will distinctly heard the words Velasval from several different sources. Silence, roared Ragnar, and instantly the noise ceased. He rose and moved forward to confront Evelyn, glaring down at her. "You are Duncan's daughter?" She hesitated, then replied. "I am King Duncan's daughter," she said with a slight emphasis on the title. "Cassandra, Princess of Ireland." "Then you are my enemy," he said, spitting the words out, "and I've sworn that you should die." Eric stepped forward. "And I've sworn that she will be safe here, Oberjal," he said. "I gave my word when I asked the ranger to help us." Ragnar looked up angrily. Again there was a buzz of conversation through the room. Eric was a popular Jarl among the Scandinavians, and Ragnar hadn't reckoned on having to contend with him over this matter. With an invading army only days away from his stronghold, he knew he couldn't afford a split with his senior war leaders. "I am Oberjal," he said. "My vow is of greater importance." Eric folded his arms across his chest. "Not to me, it isn't," he said, and there was a chorus of agreement from the crowd. "Eric cannot defy you like this. You are Oberjal," Slager suddenly interjected. "Have him imprisoned. He is defying your vow to the Vellers." "Shut up, Slager," Eric told him in an ominously calm voice. Then he readdressed himself to Ragnar. "I didn't ask you to take your death vow, Ragnar," he said, "but if you want to carry it out, I'm afraid you'll have to go through me to do it." Now Ragnar stepped down from his podium and walked closer to where Eric stood. They were of equal height, both massively built. He faced his old companion, the anger burning in his eyes. "Eric, did you know who she was when you brought her here?" Eric shook his head. Slager snorted in disgust. "Of course he knew," he cried, then stopped suddenly as the point of Eric's dagger appeared under his nose. "I've allowed that once," Eric told him. "Say it again and you're a dead man." Wordlessly, Slager backed away from the bigger man, putting a safe distance between himself and the point of the knife. Eric sheathed the dagger and turned back to Ragnar. "I didn't know," he said. "Otherwise I would never have brought her here, knowing of your vow. But the fact remains, I vouch for her safety, and my word is all important to me, as is yours to you." "Damn and blast it, Eric. Ragnar shouted. The Himajai are only 3 or 4 days' march from here. We can't afford to be fighting amongst ourselves now. It would be a shame if you had to face the Himajai with at least one and possibly both of your best leaders dead, Holt put in mildly, and the Obergel rounded on him in a fury. Shut up, Ranger. I'm of half a mind to believe that this is all you're doing. No good ever came of dealing with your kind. Holt shrugged, unimpressed by this Canadian's fury. Be that as it may, he said, it occurs to me that there might be a solution to your problem. For the time being at least, the buzz of conversation through the room was cut short as Ragnar swung his gaze around angrily. He watched Holt with narrowed eyes, expecting some trick of some kind of subterfuge. What are you talking about? My vow is binding upon me, he said, and Holt nodded agreement. I understand that, but is there any time factor involved, he asked. Now Ragnar looked puzzled and as well as suspicious. Time factor? How do you mean? If we accept that you plan to do your best to kill Evelyn, knowing that Eric will try to stop you when you do, not to mention the fact that if he doesn't, I most certainly will. Have you vowed that you'll do it at any particular time? Holt continued. The puzzled expression on Ragnar's face grew more intense. No, I didn't specify any time. I just made the vow, he said finally, and Holt nodded several times. Good. So as far as these Velas are concerned, they don't care whether you try to fulfill your vow today, or if you choose to wait until, say, after we've sent the Timajai packing. Understanding was beginning to dawn on the Oberjal's face. That's right, he said slowly. As long as the intent is there, the Velas will be satisfied. No! A shrill voice cut across them. It was Slager, the silky, self-satisfied tone gone from his voice now. Can't you see, Oberjal? He's trying to trick you. He has something in mind. The girl must die, and she must die now. Otherwise your sworn word is worthless. Slager's anger and his long-held desire for revenge on Evelyn for the events that had occurred on Scourgel had caused him to go too far. Ragnar turned on him now, a flame of anger burning in his eyes. Slager, I would advise you to get rid of this reckless habit of telling your peers that they are liars, he said, and instantly the warship captain retreated his accusation. Of course, Oberjal, I didn't mean. Ragnar cut him off before he could go further. My first concern is for the safety of Scandinavia. With these Timajai on our doorstep, Eric and I cannot afford to be fighting. If he'll agree to postpone our differences until after we've settled with them, then I will too. Eric nodded agreement instantly. It sounds like a good compromise to me. There was still one thread of suspicion in Ragnar's mind. He turned back to Holt, his heavy brows knitted together in a frown. I can't help wondering what's in it for you, Ranger. All you've done is win a postponement. Holt indicated his head slightly to one side as he considered the matter. True, he replied, but a lot can happen in the next few days. You might be killed in the battle, or Eric, or me, or all 3 of us. Besides that, my immediate priority is the same as yours, to see these Timajai driven back. After all, if they win here, it won't be long before they're invading Ireland as well. I have a sworn duty to try to prevent that. He smiled grimly. That's another of those vows that we all seem to rush around taking. Damn nuisances, aren't they? Ragnar turned and stepped back up on the dais to his massive council chair. We're agreed then, he said. We'll settle the Timajai question first, then we'll come back to this problem. Eric and Holt exchanged glances. Then both men nodded. Oddly, Slager seemed to be in disagreement with the compromise. He muttered a curse under his breath. Holt took Evelyn's arm and began to guide her from the great hall, followed by the 2 apprentices and Eric. They hadn't gone half a dozen paces when Holt turned back to Ragnar. Of course, there is one more question that I'd like to hear Slager answer, he said, as he hoped at the mention of his name. Everyone in the room involuntarily glanced at Slager. Then, when all eyes were on him, Holt continued, perhaps he could tell us what his ships are doing at Four Cork Island. Okay, well, that seems to be in the chapter. I'd like to thank you very much for listening to read up to chapter 28. If you'd like to listen to me read chapter 29, then please stay posted, and hopefully I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.